Hi everyone, welcome again to Candace's Corner. My name is Candace Cunningham. I'm a person with lived experience in cerebral palsy and developmental disabilities. I started my advocacy journey back in 2006 when a long time ago, with IHD, but now today I work for the Institute for Human Development at UMKC, where I host this podcast, Candace's Corner, for the reset at the USAID at IHD. So this season we are talking about the history of developmental disabilities in Missouri and how the system changed. And I am honored today to be talking to Mary Sullivan-Thomas, who did a lot of work with individualized supported living. So Mary Thomas is the executive director of community opportunities in Troy, Missouri. She has been in the field for over 39 years and has done hard work to make sure people with disabilities are respected and supported. Thank you, Mary, for joining us today.
Thank you, Candace, for inviting me. This is such a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. I'm glad to learn from you. How did you get into the field of developmental disabilities?
That's an interesting question. I guess when I was a little girl, there was a little boy who lived next door to us and he had Down syndrome. And I remember his mom wouldn't let us, was a neighborhood full of a bunch of kids and we'd all run amok and what have you. And his mom wouldn't let him come out and play with us like the other kids. And so I was always kind of interested in why Jeffrey wasn't out running around with us. And once in a while, under close supervision, she'd let him come out and play. So I think that was my very first exposure. And then there was a little girl who actually lived down on the other end of the street. And she too had Down syndrome, but she had more significant disabilities. Anyway, and I was friends with her older sister, so I kind of knew her just a little bit. So that's kind of early childhood kind of stuff. But really, when I went to college, I knew that, I wanted to help people. I wanted to do something to help people. And I've always been an advocate for the underdog. If there was somebody getting picked on in school, I'd always stand up for them or whatever. It was just kind of my nature. And then after I graduated with a degree in psychology, I'm like, what do you do with a worthless degree in psychology? And then I was lucky enough to stumble upon St. Louis ARC. And I applied there and I was hired there. And at the time, they were only hiring degreed folks to fill their direct service positions. They were ICFMR at the time. So I worked in St. Louis for about 4 years at St. Louis ARC and really learned a lot there and gained the passion probably that I have today for supporting people with developmental disabilities. And then I was looking for another opportunity. And back in the day, you used to have the Post-Dispatch newspaper and you looked for jobs in there. And the Post-Dispatch had an advertisement for a director of group homes in Troy, Missouri. And so I was like, Troy, Missouri sounds familiar. And my husband said, yeah, that's where Quiver River State Park is, where we went camping. I'm like, I love that park. So anyway, long story short, I came here, applied for the job, and was hired in March of 1986. And when I first started, we had just the 2 group homes. They had live-in staff, which was new to me because we didn't have that in St. Louis. And then there were 2 separate not-for-profits, one that served the early childhood population and another that had an adult day program. So our board was in the midst of designing and building our building, and they were going to house those other 2 programs. So lo and behold, when the construction was finished and everything kind of got shuffled around, those 2 nonprofits decided to dissolve and come under our county board. So that's kind of how I came to be over all of the services in Lincoln County at the time through the county board. So we're the county board for people with developmental disabilities, and we get that small tax levy. So that's kind of the long history on that one.
Wow. So I love that. And I know you talked about your neighbors, the one next door to you and the one down the street. So were they what inspired you to stay in this field for this long?
I think, like you said, my neighbors inspired me because they didn't go to our schools. You know, back in the day, kids with disabilities didn't come to our elementary schools, and so you didn't see them. And so I was kind of like, why are they not being seen and part of our community? And I think that's been it. When I moved to Troy, because I used to live in the city of St. Louis, and then I moved out here for my job, and it was just, I loved the small town feel of Troy, and the clients were really accepted. Like, they would walk around town and they had friends, and I thought, this is how it should be. People should be part of their community. And I think that's what really inspired me, just to make sure that people could live successfully in their communities, and live the way that they wanted to live. When I first moved out here, the only real employment options for people with developmental disabilities was the sheltered workshop. And there were men living in both the group homes here, because the manager of the sheltered workshop kind of oversaw the two group homes before I started. And, you know, only men can work, right? And he only wanted able-bodied men who could work living in the group homes. And I was like, well, that's kind of different. So anyway, that was just kind of the beginning. And the clients, the guys came to me and they said, we want different jobs. And I'm like, okay. So then in 1992, we started employment services, and I hired a young man. I said, you know, if you want a job next year, you're going to figure this out. And he did a wonderful job. And we created our employment program, and people's, you know, were working in the community, and we could provide them with that support. And it was really transformational for those individuals and for us as an organization and a community, because they hadn't done supported employment before. So it was neat to have people working in the community, and the community being so accepting. And so that's kind of, I guess, why I've stayed so long, is for those opportunities and experiences to help people be successful.
Well, and it's funny because you talk about it. I hope we're not going backwards, you know. So I see this where you came from, and employment is my passion. So I'm like, yeah, I just hope we're not going back. Yeah.
You're right. And then, you know, with employment comes the need, when you're not at a sheltered employment and everybody works at the same spot, transportation was a huge hurdle. So that's something else that I worked with our community on. And we created a public transportation system in 2002. So we have the Link, which is our public transportation system. That's a subsidiary of Oates. So that runs Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it's great because, as you know, a lot of people with developmental disabilities can't drive. And so transportation's critical. So that's another thing that I was heartened by our community, is everybody kind of came together to create this public transportation system. And it's been in business now for 23 years.
Wow, we need to learn from you guys about that. So now, I know we will talk, what is individualized supported living?
So that's a great program. And I'm glad you said it properly, individualized supported living, because some people think it's independent supported living, and that's not the case. ISL is for anyone and everyone. And what that is in about, I'm trying to remember, Candace, that I failed to do my research. I apologize. I think it was like 1988 or 1989. A man by the name of Derek Dufresne came to town, and he said, we should do this thing called individualized supported living. And so I remember I was sitting like in the first or second row of his presentation. I was just like on the edge of my chair, like, yes, this is what needs to happen. Because until that time, folks lived in group homes, and you had, like in St. Louis, we had 8 people in each group home. We had adults sharing bedrooms. And same when I came here, that we had adults sharing bedrooms that didn't necessarily choose to share bedrooms or be in an intimate relationship. And so when supported living came around, it was great because we could help people rent property in the community from a traditional landlord, and then we can just provide those supports. So it kind of separates the housing from the supports to some degree. In some larger communities, you might have different providers within the same ISL. But in Troy, we're so small that it's always been that we've been the provider for the services in those homes. So basically, supported living is a model designed around the individual. So you take that individual and you say, well, how many hours of support do they really need? Not everybody needs 24 hours of support. Maybe they just need help getting up in the morning and getting off to work or day program, and then they're gone all day. So they don't need staff. So you don't need to staff an empty house. And then if you're home in the evening, then you can provide staffing then. But let's say maybe they visit their family every Saturday. So you don't need staff then. So you build the staffing pattern around that person's life. And then one thing that I was always proud of was that when people gained independence, we reduced our hours. And at the time, I'm talking years and years ago, the regional office said we were one of the few providers that did that. Everybody else kept their staffing up there. I'm like, no, if these folks are gaining independence and they don't need us, we need to back out. So supported living gives you that flexibility to really build the supports and the services around that individual. So they might, and a person can choose where they want to live. Do they want to live in a house, in an apartment, whatever kind of dwelling they choose. And then the services are on top of that. So the provider then can come in and teach those activities of daily living, like how to do your laundry and pay your bills and those things. And it's not any specific skill level. So we have some folks who are pretty involved who need 24-hour supports, and they're still in supported living. So it's not like you have to have all kinds of independent living skills in order to be in ISL. That's where you learn those skills.
Oh, that's good to know. Oh, thank you. Is it true that people used to live in the regional office?
Yes. When I first started, the regional office actually had a respite facility. Like part of the building was like dormitory style respite. Yeah. And at the time, it was one of the few respite facilities around. So it really did hold a valued role in the community. But since then, it's transitioned out of there. And I'm sure it was not ideal because you're in an office building and you're trying to also like live your life. So that's kind of hard for people. But yeah, at Hannibal, there was a respite center within the building.
Well, and Kyla Merrill, she told me the Kansas City regional office used to be where people lived and stuff. And I've been in that building. And I'm like, I don't know how,
No, and it was just like more like a dormitory. So people didn't have the opportunity to prepare their own meals. It wasn't a family living environment.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad we moved away from that. How did life get better for people when they did move into their communities?
Well, they have neighbors. Not everybody that interacts with them is paid to interact with them. It's really sad if you really kind of plot out someone's life. And if the only people that they interact with are paid to interact with them, I mean, that's just a sad state of affairs. So when folks are able to live in the community, they have neighbors, they have friends, they have coworkers. And I love it because sometimes I don't even know who those people are. And that's great, that they have that ability. Just being in proximity gives you more of that opportunity. Because if you're segregated at a regional office or at a HAB center, you don't have those relationships. You don't wave at your neighbor when you walk up and down the street or when you go get your mail. So just living in the community gives you so many rich opportunities that you don't have otherwise.
And it probably made the lifespan longer too.
Well, yeah, if you're happier, you have fulfilling life, then yes. Well, and statistics bear that out now. People with development, all of us are living a little bit longer, and people with developmental disabilities are living a lot longer than they used to, 40 years ago.
So, and it's funny because when you were talking about you don't want the paid support staff, when you mentioned that, I just thought about the stall in Shelley Windows always saying, this is the last thing you need to fill out. Let's figure out what we have, that natural support, before we get to that paid eligibility part. So it's, I know it, but it's kind of reinforcing to hear it from, someone else,
Yes.
Who is the key people or organization that helps make ISL possible?
Well, of course, it's a waiver service. So without the waiver, we wouldn't be able to do ISL. And then, of course, you need the Department of Mental Health because they are in charge of all of that. And really, it's the community providers, I believe. So organizations like Starling and MACDDS, they have a lot to do with helping to facilitate those kinds of things among their members.
I know when we talked earlier, you talked about I did research and you did a work group. So are those things that you wish the work group would have addressed that are still an issue today?
Yes. One thing that I was really excited about when they first started talking about ISL was that it was a one-page budget and you could sit there with the person and their supports and the case manager and they could do that up right then and there and then submit it. I was like, man, that's beautiful. We never did that and we're still not there. So that would be really awesome is if that could be built together and then that budget was respected as what that person's choices were, and then that was approved. But now, you have to go through UR and all that other kind of stuff that sometimes takes away from that person's goals.
Yeah. It's funny because if that's the goal for them to live independent, yeah. Yeah, I know. What are your hopes for the future of services in Missouri?
Wow. Well, I hope that people can still choose the way that they want to live within our service delivery system without being too wrapped up in red tape. It's so sad that, it takes 3 months to get an adaptive spoon approved, which that shouldn't be. Just the processes take so long to help people get to where they want to go. If it took me 6 months to move into an apartment, that would be really hard. And that's kind of the situation people with developmental disabilities are in with ISL, because we can't rent an apartment before somebody moves in or before they're identified. So then once they're identified, you're like, oh, wait, we got to find you someplace you can live. So it makes that process very, very long. So I think making sure that the bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of people's hopes and dreams.
Love that. Thank you. And then what advice would you give to people who are just starting now to make the system better?
Make sure you participate. When there's a waiver review, read that manual, read it line by line, sentence by sentence, make sure it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, speak up, go to the public hearings, educate your legislators. They hold our purse strings. If they don't know our needs, if they don't know the needs of people with developmental disabilities, they're not going to appropriate the right amount of funding. So we really need to continue those advocacy efforts with the system in all facets. Because when you look at the amount of rules and regulations that impact our system, it's no wonder that people get burnt out and bogged down. So if we could simplify the system, if there's any way to do that moving forward, that would be great. So yeah, anybody who's new to the system, who's wanting to make changes moving forward, is making, and always make sure that every single decision is based in what's best for the client, what's best for the person.
Thank you very much. Well, those are all the questions I had for you today. Would you like to add anything else?
I really appreciate this opportunity, Candace, and I love that you're doing all these interviews. I think this is really valuable information. And I appreciate all your advocacy efforts, very much so. And I don't have anything else to say, I guess.
Well, I appreciate you talking to me or to us about individualized supported living and how it began and how it used to be and way back in the 1980s and how we can move forward and make a better path for everyone.
You know, and when things are accessible, it's better for everyone. Everyone can use accessibility. So if we look at universal design when it comes to homes and buildings, and we make things more accommodating for people, it's good for the whole community.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you so much, and you have a great Thanksgiving.
You too. Have a great Thanksgiving and happy holidays.